Hello, I'm Phyllis Schlafly. Thank you for letting me visit with you via the medium of television in your homes. My friends in Maine have asked me to tell you something about the experience I've had with fighting the Equal Rights Amendment. First of all, let me tell you how I got into this battle. I grew up during the Depression in St. Louis, Missouri. I worked my way through college and then went on to get a master's degree at Harvard University. After being in the workforce for several years, doing research in political science and economics, I met a wonderful guy named Fred Schlafly. We were married and settled down in a little town on the bluffs of the Mississippi River called Alton, Illinois. We raised 6 children and now proudly have 2 grandchildren. Along the way, I did a little freelance writing and speaking to groups. And then in 1972, among the other subjects that I wrote about, along came something called the Equal Rights Amendment. It was voted out by Congress that year. It sounded very simple. It just said, equality of rights shall not be denied on account of sex. But when we looked into it, we found that it would not benefit women. In fact, it would take away many rights that women had always enjoyed, such as the rights of the wife, which are very different from the rights of the husband. And then we found that the most immediate dramatic effect would be that young women would have to be registered for the military draft and drafted and sent into military combat just like men. When we brought up this issue, we found that the advocates of the Equal Rights Amendment said that was what they wanted. They never denied it. They said that was real equality and women should have equality. But that idea did not sell with the majority of the American people, especially those mothers and fathers who had lived through previous wars and knew what war was all about. The state legislatures held hearings, and ultimately I went around and testified at more than 30 of the state legislative hearings, and I testified against the Equal Rights Amendment. The advocates of E.R.A. brought in a lot of movie stars like Alan Alda to say how great it would be to draft women, but we brought in some real experts who knew what war was all about. For example, General Elizabeth Hoisington was one of our witnesses. She had been the head of the Women's Army Corps during World War II, and she had seen war. Here is what General Hoisington had to tell the state legislators.
War is hell. Human bodies are frightfully damaged or destroyed. I'm Brigadier General Elizabeth Hoisington, U.S. Army retired. It is tragic that so many of our young men have been victims of war, but how much more tragic it would be if we send our young women into combat. In my lifetime and during my years as director of the Women's Army Corps, I've never known 10 women who could endure 3 months of actual combat. Unfortunately, if the Equal Rights Amendment to the U.S. Constitution passes, we'd have no choice. Under the draft, women would be drafted and forced into combat without an equal chance to survive.
Despite the powerful argument we had that E.R.A. would positively bring about the drafting of women and the sending of young girls into military combat, the battle continued. It continued primarily because E.R.A. was supported by almost all of the media in this country, plus very powerful politicians. We developed an organization of women to go and testify at the various hearings. Along the way, as the leader of this movement, I decided I needed to go to law school. So I went to law school, picked up my degree, and now am a member of the Illinois Bar. I did that so that when I speak on this constitutional and legal subject, I would know what I was talking about and be able to present the facts and the law with credibility. But the E.R.A. campaign didn't go very fast, very far. By 1977, the E.R.A.ers wanted something more. They wanted to use taxpayers' money in order to force the ratification. At that time, Bella Abzug was a member of Congress, and she persuaded Congress to vote $5 million to something called the International Women's Year Commission to have a convention in Houston, Texas, in order to propagandize for the Equal Rights Amendment. Congress thought that all points of view would be represented. But of course, with the E.R.A.ers in charge, they only allowed their delegates and their point of view to be dominant in the use of this money. The convention opened in Houston in November of 1977. It was a tremendous media event. At least 3,000 reporters converged on Houston to cover it. And that is where it became very clear that the E.R.A. movement wasn't about equal opportunity, equal employment, or the rights that most women want in this country. The E.R.A. was about abortion, taxpayer-funded abortions, and homosexual and lesbian rights. That convention in Houston in November of 1977 made this very clear. The convention passed 3 resolutions, which Newsweek magazine called their hot-button resolutions, and they inescapably showed the linkage between the Equal Rights Amendment, abortion, and gay, homosexual, lesbian rights. Just look at some of the pictures from this 1977 convention. They are old pictures, but they are actual newsreels of what took place on those unhappy days in November 1977.
The organizers, the people who worked behind the scenes, the leaders who made the conference possible include hundreds of women from all over the nation. A few, certainly not all, of the key players, some of the most visible conference leaders include Bella Zavitsky-Abzug, one of the most energetic, controversial American politicians.
Madam Chairperson, I move the adoption of the following resolution. The Equal Rights Amendment should be ratified.
Question arises on the adoption of the resolution. All those in favor, will you please rise?
After the convention passed the resolution for the Equal Rights Amendment, then they moved on to pass one that they called reproductive freedom. Of course, you and I know that that means abortion on demand, financed by the taxpayers. And these women who voted this resolution do look upon abortion as the preeminent woman's right.
We support the U.S. Supreme Court decisions which guarantee reproductive freedom to women.
The resolution on reproductive freedom is adopted.
Finally, they took up the resolution on lesbian rights, and they voted it very enthusiastically, as you will see in the pictures. Of course, everybody attending that convention was not a lesbian, but it is significant that the lesbians did persuade the majority of the delegates attending to support the lesbian agenda. It was at this point that E.R.A. became inescapably locked in to not only abortion and abortion funding, but also the entire homosexual lesbian agenda.
Madam Chair, I move the following resolution on sexual preference. Congress, state, and local legislatures should enact legislation to eliminate discrimination on the basis of sexual and affectional preference in areas including, but not limited to, employment, housing, public accommodations, credit, public facilities, government funding, and the military. This is a feminist issue because discrimination against women begins at the basis of sexuality. There are double standards. One standard for males, another for females, one standard for heterosexuals, another for homosexuals. And all these double standards in the issue of sexuality work to keep women in their place. Human rights are indivisible, and all women, when we march together in equality, we will march as heterosexuals and homosexuals, minority women and majority women, rich and poor. We will all go together as full human beings.
Thank you. The resolution has clearly carried. It is adopted.
That Houston Convention showed not only that the Equal Rights Amendment was supported by the same people who were for abortion funding and homosexual lesbian rights, but also that E.R.A. is the indispensable legal link toward the achievement of abortion and homosexual goals. No state ratified the Equal Rights Amendment after that Houston Convention. It came up for a vote more than 25 times in various state legislatures around the country, and it was always defeated. In my state of Illinois, it came up for a vote every year for 10 years, and it was always defeated. 5 states that originally ratified the Equal Rights Amendment then went ahead and changed their mind and rescinded because they knew E.R.A. was bad for our country. The E.R.A. advocates got a 3-year extension so they could continue the battle for 10 years, but still it didn't help. And on June the 30th, 1982, they ran out of time and the federal E.R.A. died. At that point, the advocates of the goals of the Equal Rights Amendment decided to push their plan through state E.R.A.s. State E.R.A.s would have many of the bad effects of a federal E.R.A., including the effect on abortion funding and homosexual rights. Most of the states, however, where they brought a state E.R.A. up for a vote, went ahead and defeated it on referendum. A state E.R.A. was defeated in New York, in New Jersey, in Florida, in Nevada, and in Iowa. However, they kept at it. They brought it up for a vote in the legislature in Wisconsin, and there the state legislators had the good sense to add some additional language, saying we're for equal rights, but let us not let E.R.A. have anything to do with abortion or homosexual rights. Do you know what happened? The E.R.A. advocates came in and testified against E.R.A. They said they didn't want it if they couldn't get abortion and homosexual rights too. And so the legislature did not pass it out. The same thing happened in Minnesota. They tried a state E.R.A. there, and the legislators added an amendment that said, except that we will not let E.R.A. be used to require the taxpayers to pay for abortions. And the E.R.A.ers voted against E.R.A., and it did not come out for a vote of the people. Meanwhile, the American Civil Liberties Union, which is a leading lawyers' organization supporting both abortion and E.R.A., began to file lawsuits in states that already had state E.R.A.s, such as Hawaii and Massachusetts and Pennsylvania. They argued that since abortion is a medical procedure that is performed only on women, it is discrimination within the meaning of E.R.A. to deny state tax funds for abortions. Nellie Gray, who is the esteemed woman lawyer who leads the March on Life every year, has also made it very clear about the E.R.A. abortion connection. She said, the E.R.A. mentality is the source of today's social evils, hostility toward women, toward preborn babies, men, family, church, state, and God. Meanwhile, the U.S. Supreme Court, in an important case called Newport News Shipbuilding, held, discrimination based on a woman's pregnancy is, on its face, discrimination because of her sex. Now let's look at another issue, the impact of E.R.A. on veterans' preference. It was a big shock to many people when the president of the League of Women Voters went down to Washington and testified right out that the Equal Rights Amendment would wipe out veterans' preference. What she said was that veterans' preference would fall in a challenge under the E.R.A. Now, how does E.R.A. have anything to do with veterans? It doesn't mention veterans any more than it mentions abortion. What it does is to mention sex, and that is subject to a lot of interpretations. The E.R.A.ers argue that since most veterans are men, it discriminates against women to give benefits and preference to male veterans. We all know that female veterans get exactly the same benefits as male veterans, but that doesn't satisfy them. The E.R.A. types want to take away the preferences from the veterans who have fought to defend our country. Now let's talk about another issue connected with the Equal Rights Amendment, and that is what it will do for homosexual and lesbian rights. You would really have to be blind not to know what is going on in terms of the political advocacy and campaigning of those who are working for gay rights in this country. Take a quick look at some of these pictures filmed at the Gay Pride Parade in San Francisco.
In recent years, many decent Americans have seen spectacles like this on public streets, events called gay pride parades. Militant homosexuals strongly support so-called equal rights amendments. In fact, here
in San Francisco, the homosexuals have been agitating to get medical and health benefits just as though they were husbands and wives. In New York City, the homosexuals have been demonstrating and agitating to get religious organizations to agree to hire homosexuals in their charitable and educational offices. Legal authorities have said that the effect in this area is not clear because, remember, the word used in E.R.A. is not women, it is sex. The leading casebook used in law schools on sex discrimination, written by Barbara Babcock, says that the effect on homosexual rights is not clear, but it's hard to justify any difference of treatment against homosexuals. The Yale Law Journal had an article on the legality of homosexual marriages, which argued that E.R.A. would require us to grant marriage licenses to homosexuals. There are all kinds of other issues involved in what E.R.A. would do in this area. Would it require us to say to the armed forces, you may not discharge a homosexual or a lesbian? Would it forbid the courts from taking homosexuality or lesbianism into account in awarding child custody, or making adoptions, or granting artificial insemination rights? Would the Equal Rights Amendment require landlords, even those who rent rooms or apartments in their own building, to rent to homosexuals? Would E.R.A. require sex education courses in the schools to treat homosexuality as though it were just an alternate lifestyle, like having a traditional family? Would the Equal Rights Amendment require us to give funding to homosexual groups on college campuses? Will it require us to give affirmative action to homosexuals just as though they were a discriminated against minority like religion or race or sex? Nobody really knows the answer to all these questions, but they are certainly real threats. Now let's look at the effect that the Equal Rights Amendment will have on private schools and religious schools. This is a tremendous area due to a recent U.S. Supreme Court decision in a case called Bob Jones University. In that case, the Supreme Court held that the Internal Revenue Service can withdraw tax exemption from any school that has a regulation contrary to public policy, even though the school asserts that it is a religious school and relies on its First Amendment freedom of religion rights. The court said, too bad. If you have anything contrary to public policy, you cannot have your tax exemption. So let's look at what this will mean for private and religious schools if Maine should put an Equal Rights Amendment into the Constitution. Of course, if you have an all-girls school or a boys' school, that discriminates on account of sex. So we do not believe there could ever again be any school that is all for boys or all for girls. But not only the school itself, what about the sports? What about the classes? What about sex education classes? Could you ever again have any separation? That's the first question, and nobody's sure of the answer to that question. If you were not absolutely prohibited from separating the sexes at all, then comes the next question, will you lose your tax exemption? Would the Equal Rights Amendment in the Maine Constitution empower the state of Maine to deprive tax exemption from all religious and private schools that have any separate treatment or different treatment of boys and girls? Some schools may want to have a different dress code or a different length of hair code. Some schools may want to separate boys and girls for certain classes like sex education. Some schools may want to offer football for boys and volleyball for girls. But all of these are differences made on account of sex, and that is exactly what is prohibited by the Equal Rights Amendment. These are some of the reasons why E.R.A. is such a dangerous language to put into the Constitution where it's locked in. If you have a bad law, you can go back to the legislature and say, let's amend it or let's repeal it. But if you put it into the Constitution, then it is very, very difficult ever to change it. Nobody can point to any good effect the Equal Rights Amendment will have, but it has these tremendous bad effects in so many areas. Some people say, don't worry, because other states have passed state equal rights amendments and they haven't had these bad effects. That simply isn't true. The veterans' preference case in Massachusetts was brought before the state E.R.A. went into effect. The famous case that involved private schools in Pennsylvania was brought before the Pennsylvania state E.R.A. went into effect. There is an old case involving homosexual marriages in a state with a state E.R.A., but that case is 10 years old, and nobody thinks it would stand up again today because so much has changed in that area. With the Equal Rights Amendment, you are buying a blank check. You are giving tremendous power to the courts to make all of these determinations without any input or voice from the people. This is why many of us have labored so hard and so long to defeat the Equal Rights Amendment. Take a look at what the Equal Rights Amendment really says. The language does not define equality of rights, and it does not define sex. It leaves all that up to the courts. The record is very clear from the evidence around the rest of the country and from leading authorities that it does include taxpayer funding of abortions, wiping out the conscience clauses to allow nurses and doctors to refuse to perform abortions if it is against their religious faith, taking away veterans' preference, taking away the tax exemption of religious and private schools if they make any separation or difference of treatment on account of sex, implementing the whole homosexual lesbian rights agenda. And then there's one other issue we must mention, and that is the matter of how much it is going to cost you on your insurance policy. You see, the advocates of E.R.A. say they want to make everything the same, but at the present time, women get very much lower insurance rates when it comes to buying automobile accident insurance and life insurance. The reason is that women have fewer accidents than men, so they're entitled to lower auto rates, and women live longer, so they're entitled to lower life insurance rates. If the Equal Rights Amendment comes in and mandates absolute equality of treatment so that we have to pay the same rates for men and women, it's going to cost women hundreds of dollars a year in extra insurance rates for which you'll get no additional benefit whatsoever. Here are the figures that were worked out in Hartford, Connecticut for how much additional it will cost young women if an equality provision is put into the law or the Constitution. You will see on this first chart that a 19-year-old woman would have her rates raised on automobile accident insurance by one company $143 a year, by another company $165 a year, and by a third company $257 a year. And then look at this second chart to see how the rates will be raised for a 23-year-old woman. Company A would raise her rates $238 a year, Company B $153 a year, and Company C $578 a year. The Equal Rights Amendment is the most misrepresented proposal in history. It has nothing to do with women's rights or the rights that people really care about. We have federal laws to guarantee equal rights in employment, in education, in credit, and all those other things. What E.R.A. means is taxpayer-funded abortions, implementing the whole range of rights that are demanded by the homosexuals and lesbians. It means taking away the benefits from our veterans that they have earned. It means taking away tax exemption from religious and private schools in order to force them to not make any difference of treatment between boys and girls. And E.R.A. also means costing you a lot of money in your annual insurance bill. The Equal Rights Amendment hasn't won anywhere since that Houston conference in 1977. It's been defeated in state after state because people recognize what it will really do. It is people like you in many other states who have defeated the Equal Rights Amendment. They realized what the stakes are, despite all that misrepresentation and propaganda that often appears in the media. We need you to do all those things that are necessary to win elections. Talk to your friends. Talk to the people you are with in clubs or in your church groups. Send out postcards. Knock on doors. Do telephoning. Offer your services to the organizations that are trying to raise funds and to defeat the Equal Rights Amendment. We need your help. We're counting on you. We have proved in the Equal Rights Amendment battle nationally that just ordinary citizens like you and me can determine policy in our country. That's what self-government is all about. And that's why we need your help between now and November.
Equality. An interesting word. Some people want me to pay more for my car insurance and life insurance, the same high rates that men pay. I cannot afford that kind of equality. The same people say I should have the right to marry a woman and my brother the right to marry a man. Equality? You've got to be kidding. This peculiar kind of equality is called E.R.A. They even threaten to take away my dad's veterans benefits because he's a man. If they pass the E.R.A. in Vermont, these people will push for a national E.R.A. to force women to go into military combat. That's some equality. Equal pay for equal work and equal opportunity. That's already the law in Vermont. But E.R.A. is a wolf in sheep's clothing. I don't want their kind of equality because I already have real equality, and I won't let them take away my freedoms.
Vote no on Proposal 1.